Hey there. As a listener to the Cloudcast, you're probably interested in data, especially about the ways in which data continues to shape our world. Because of that, you need to check out Data Citizens Dialogues, a forward-thinking show brought to you by the folks over at Colibra, the leader in data intelligence. You'll hear firsthand from industry titans, innovators, and executives from some of the world's largest companies as they dive into the hottest topics in data. You'll get insights into everything from AI governance and data sharing down to more nuanced questions like, how do we ensure data readability at a global scale? My favorite episode so far is data in healthcare. As someone in the sandwich generation, I need to keep up with how data is able to help multiple generations get much better health results. While data may be shaping our world, Data Citizens Dialogues is shaping the conversation. Follow Data Citizens Dialogues on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast, or head over to colibra.com/podcast to learn more. That's COLLIBRA.com/podcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and what seems to be a recurring theme here, joined this week once again by Brandon Witcher from Software Defined Talk. Brandon, we just finished sort of the Super Bowl of tech, at least the Super Bowl of cloud. AWS reInvent is wrapped up. How much of it did you get a chance to catch?
Well, I watched as much as I could. Of course, I watched the first day. I mean, you have to get the full CEO keynote,
right?
And then I did watch some of the AI stuff. But like any great event, like a great concert, a festival, your interest and your effort starts to wane. So towards the end of the week, I did more of like kind of just checking in on the various social sites to see if any massive announcements were made. But I think we got enough. We got enough to right. Get the people up to date for those that maybe didn't watch the whole thing.
That's right. Yeah. So what we're going to do today is really focus on the keynote, because I think we always feel like the keynote gives a vibe of where the company wants to go. It obviously highlights the announcements that are the most important to them, or that they want people to perceive are the most important. Before we dive into all that, let's hit on a couple of sort of overall takeaways, because this one was a little different. It did go 3 hours, or basically 3 hours. But first off, new CEO, Matt Garmon, new CEO. What were your initial impressions of Matt Garmon, kind of running the stage? I know he's obviously, spoken at the event a lot, but what were all your takeaways from the first time Matt Garmon owned the stage, at least for the majority of the time?
Well, my immediate thing was a clone of Jassy, a little bit more relaxed, right? Then certainly the Slepsky era, I always thought was like, he felt a little bit like unsure of himself. There's just so much to go through.
Yeah.
Whereas you can tell Garmon has been part of this since day one, which he kind of went through in his history. So he's really relaxed, knows everything, a tad bit more casual, which I like. No jacket, right? He did not don the sport coat, which I'm always just a sign of like, whether it's true or not, technical prowess. So I think he was confident. A little bit like, just like sort of like Jassy turned down like two levels is what I would say, right? And my main thing away from my highest level take is like Garmon is the legacy AWS CEO, because we'll talk about it. He did all the hits, right? Compute, storage, networking, right, whatever, right? But then, of course, like our triumphant return of the Godfather, Jassy, just out of, really they should have had him drop in like sort of like Tom Cruise would from the air, but he just walked on stage. But he comes out, and what does he do? He does all of the AI stuff, right? So Jassy is clearly the AWS AI CEO. And also too, like I got that old feel from Jassy. It's like, it's not like he's not the CEO that's sort of like reading slides. He has been deep involved in AI. And, it was sort of like, for him, it's like riding a bike. I'm like, oh, he's back, baby. He's going he's going deep. He's like firing off his stuff. So that was my biggest thing. It was like, I think I don't know what the Slepsky thing, ultimately why they chose him to leave. But like, I got that impression today is like, Garmon, you're in charge of all the old stuff, right? And this makes a lot of money, and I need you doing that. And I'm taking over this AI stuff. That was my biggest take from the whole thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. You and I, we didn't watch it live together. We did sort of watch it live together. We were over on the Software Defined Talk Slack. I agree with you. I think Matt did a good job for first time. A couple of things we were Silivsky, I think, he would go like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. We were worried about his stamina. Matt seemed to have no problem. Like he cranked through the thing. He read through stuff. He read every word that was on the teleprompter as if it was like a 6-page slide. He was going to get all the details. But yeah, he did feel, I don't want to say Jassy light, but he felt like, if you were to say, okay, exactly how would a lifelong Amazon or AWS person speak, exactly what tone, exactly what words, what phrases, what day one, what listening to the customer, what, work backwards, he hit every single one of those and they felt supernatural to him. Like he has been speaking this language. I thought his, appearance wise, like you said, didn't come out in the sport coat. He almost had that look to him. Like he was like, man, I've already been working for 7 hours this morning. I've been doing meetings. I've been working on stuff. I just came from that. It wasn't like it wasn't like a fancy shirt. It was just your basic sort of classic, blue business shirt with, a pair of jeans. And he probably went right back to doing, 18 more hours of work. Like he looks like a grinder. Like he looks like a dude who's like, yeah, that guy is going to work harder than you. He's going to crank out more stuff than you. He's going to have super high expectations. Yeah, the Jassy thing, I was a little disappointed he didn't have like sort of like his own music like they would do for WWE, like The Rock coming out or something. But yeah, he felt like there was a definite glint in his eye of like, I miss doing the keynotes, man. I used to own this joint. I don't get to do it anymore as CEO. I have to put up with 9,000 different things. But like, he was like a rock star coming out and just being like, I'm gonna, it was like when Prince came out when they did like the George Harrison thing, and then Prince did that guitar solo for like 15 minutes in the middle of that one George Harrison song, and people were like, yeah, he runs. I'll put a link in the show note if you've never seen it. But he came out and ran the joint. We weren't sure at first. He went out for 30 minutes.
No,
he went out for 30 minutes.
The whole thing was fascinating to watch that because not only did he come out, but I think you hit it on so many things. You said there, like when you were talking about Garmon, it was like, I think both of him and Jassy have spent pretty much their entire careers at AWS. I may be wrong on the Garmon. I think Garmon's been there almost, because he sort of came up through the, he's sort of like the second shadow, right? If it's sort of like Jassy was the original shadow, right, to Bezos, so he's like grand shadow. I don't know, so because he shadowed Jassy, right? And I think it is like, I guess it's one thing I thought about is like, the level of true belief that these people have in the culture of Amazon and what they've been doing is incredible. I mean, I don't know if we should be worried about it or we should just be in awe of it. I have not worked at one place my entire career. I've worked at many different places. So I sort of like, I don't know if that's good or bad either, but you get a sense of like how different things are at different places. But to kind of get into maybe some of the content was, one of the things that clearly, Garmon just almost like I felt like he almost felt compelled to tell the story of EC2 in Nitro, right? These are well-worn stories within AWS. I mean, we're 15 years in, man. This has been discussed ad nauseum, but it was like, but they kind of do it from the thing. It's like, they just are so proud of what it is and the decisions are made. They just feel like they have to tell you every single time, right? And then they're always reminding you about like, well, we went out and we talked to the customers as if like, it's like so unique. I'm like, they really believe like they're the only ones. I get this impression every time I'm watching, like they think they're the only ones that are doing this, right? They're the only ones who are like, we did, we went out, we talked to the customers, we innovated it technology wise. And now let me tell you ad nauseum about why the Nitro virtualization layer gives us all these advantages. I'm like, man, we've been here. Like we've been at the keynotes. We know this. You don't need to cover this, but like he went through it over and over. And it's just like, I don't know. I think it's just part of like true believers. It's like, they just don't, they're like, you haven't heard how great Nitro is. And and I'm going to tell you again and again and again. And then I'm going to also tell you about working backwards again and again and again. And it's like, I think we're going to be in AWS reInvent, like the 50th version of this. And they're still going to be talking about that.
Yeah, I do sort of wonder if, because obviously this was his first one, right? The Silivsky, I think, did 2 or maybe he did 3. They obviously were, they're doing the planning for this. They probably started it back in like January or something. And I wonder if Jassy came in there, and like if I can imagine this, like if it was like a movie, if you're making a movie of like, hey, this is the behind the scene documentary of Matt Garmon's first keynote for AWS, you would have this dramatic scene where Jassy comes walking in. And they go, okay, we're going to do this stuff. And they go, Mr. Jassy, do you have any comments? And he goes, I have 2 notes. Number 1, $100 billion. Does anybody know what that is? That's our cloud business. We will get back to talking about our cloud business. We do $100 billion a year. And number two, I have $1 trillion. Mr. Jassy, what is $1 trillion? That will be the segment that I will do about about AI. And I'm hoping to get $1 trillion added to the market cap of Amazon. Other than that, I have no notes. Please update the fonts and... that basically feels like what his involvement was of like, we're going to talk about cloud. You're going to talk about it for, I think we measured it as 73 minutes and then we'll come out and we're going to talk about AI. All right. So what we said we were going to do for this show, because, again, people may have already watched the keynote and be like, we don't need a thing. You've got 5 takeaways. I've got 5 takeaways, give or take. Why don't you go first, and we'll kind of go back and forth on, some more detailed takeaways beyond just the CEO stuff.
Well, I think the first thing is kind of the simplest thing is that, we know this before, but the culture of Amazon is the everything store, right? And I think what I saw in this presentation today was sort of like AWS continues to be, I'm going to call it the every service store, right? I mean, they just have a million different services. And really that was the Garmon part of it, was just going through the entire set of legacy services. And honestly, like I kind of joke about it, but it really is kind of what I want. I mean, to be honest, because I think this is where most of the money is spent. These are the things that most people are using. And so when I say that, I mean, compute, network, databases, right? So they went through all the updates of that stuff. And you can either look at it like boring, why is he saying this? But you can also look at it sort of like, actually, this is where all the new interest, or this is where all the money is made. So making sure that all of these things are important and updated, and we've got the latest and greatest things. I thought that was like, to me, sort of like why, and it became more obvious to me because I was kind of talking before. It's like, this is why Garmin's in charge, right? Like this is why he is that. It's like, he has all of the history of doing this. And so it really is, to me, it was kind of like, let's get back to the basics. And, we kind of joked on the Slack, like how many mentions of AI would there be? And there really wasn't, I don't think there was a mention of AI for the first 20 minutes, at least, right? Because they were just going through the greatest hits. So I would say it's kind of come back to, maybe it's a little bit boring, but it's sort of Amazon manifesting its culture inside of AWS. They have a service for everything. There's a database for everything. And everything at Amazon is predicated on choice, and they want to have everything. And they do pretty much have everything with AWS. And now I thought that was the whole first part of the keynote.
Yeah, no, I agree. They did get back to it. They didn't sort of show the slide that was like the 9 trillion different services, but you're right. They, for the 4 core primitives, and now they have sort of a 5th primitive. But yeah, for compute, storage, databases, I don't think they had networking per se, but and they had inferencing as its own sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. It was a lot of services, and your service console is going to keep, the fonts are going to keep getting smaller in there so they can squeeze them in. The first thing I had on my list was they used to spend a lot of time on, in the compute section on the new, the 40 new flavors of x86. There wasn't any mention of x86. This was all about ARM and all about GPUs, or at least AI accelerators. And it was, I think it was just purely coincidental. Like, we talked about the Intel stuff and Pat Gelsinger, but like, it does make you sort of go, is there much, I don't want to say like, is there much life left for x86, but in terms of like where all the growth is going to be. And if you do anything that has anything to do with compute, whether it's like you're in the operating system business or you're doing security stuff or whatever, like it feels like they're trying to signal to the market, like all of our money, all of our research, all of our funds going forward are going to be around those two things and trying to grow them the same way that like, when Apple would be like, yeah, we're not doing that connector anymore, or we're not doing whatever, like you may not love it, but like, that's the direction we're taking going forward. It very much felt to me like it was like the 1-2 punch to Intel. Like your 78-page plan's not going to work, and the biggest cloud provider's not talking about your type of chips anymore. And if you were the Intel folks, you were probably like, oh man, like it couldn't have got any worse for them. But I do feel like that's where the future of like compute for servers is going to be all about the conversations.
No, I mean, just to pick up on the things I took away, and I think the 3 things that, to kind of give them the names, right? So Graviton is their ARM, line of ARM processors. And he had a great stat. Right. He said all of the workloads, all of AWS in 2018 Basically, if you take that entire workload, now runs on Graviton and whatever, AWS 2024. So that just kind of shows you, it's like, I don't know exactly what that means, but it did seem like a pretty cool comparison. It was like, wow. So it's not like, oh, we have this sideline chip. It's like, it's running a major portion of our business. And then the other ones were Tranium and Inferencing. Tough to say these names. But you're right. Those were the three things. That's the message you got was, and I kind of took again, just applying the Amazon principles. It's like the reason they're doing it, margin, right? If you use our chips, you're going to save a lot more money and we're going to charge you a lot less and we're going to make a ton of money. So don't worry about, using, although they were very quick to always be like, oh, and we're great friends with NVIDIA. But they were, I mean, the point was like, well, like these work pretty well. Like we're pretty cheap. So you should consider us. And I think that same thing went with the ARM story as well.
Yeah. Everything was 30 to 40% faster and cheaper. And yeah, without calling out NVIDIA, this was very much a, we no longer want to be locked in to being, kind of kept hostage by NVIDIA's supply chain, and we're going to try and own our own destiny. Which that's something they've been doing for a long time, so it wasn't surprising. They did make a very big deal about trying to imply that like this is the year of like inferencing for AI, which basically means like you're going to put more of these things into production, and we think the number one concern there is going to be compute cost, right, or inferencing cost, which is just basically like AI compute, for serving it out for public. So yeah, no, it was the year 2025 is once again going to be a year of getting back to talking about chips and compute as we did this year. What's next on your list?
Next on my list was, let's get into the AI side of it. So really the big push was around AWS Bedrock, which is essentially, I'm going to oversimplify it, but it's basically their toolkit to build a chatbot or some type of call center agent, right? So it sort of combines, if you will, RAG, right? Guardrails, which they spent a lot of time talking about guardrails. So think of it as sort of like, hey, they want you to go in there and say, we have a specialized set of information that you can analyze, you can build your model with, right? You can then put guardrails around it. That just means like you don't want your chatbot talking about like politics or current events. You just want to talk about whatever it is you do, and you can do all of this in AWS Bedrock, and then inside of AWS Bedrock was just like, I don't know how many services there was, but this was the second day. The Swami, or he's the basically head of AI, was going through all of them, and they have clearly thought through, or they have discovered a ton of different use cases when they're doing this. And this is really how Jassy got on stage, right? Jassy's sort of like, I think his reason he probably told Garmon is like, I'm not coming out as the AWS person. I'm coming out as the Amazon CEO to talk about how we're using this in retail and video and things like that. And he kind of went through and he talked about if you've ever used Rufus, that's the Amazon chatbot on the retail, like, tell me about the socks that I want to buy or something like that. So he kind of went through all of those things. And so that was really the biggest thing. And so I kind of left it with one, you've talked probably even more than I have around it, but like, what are the use cases? I think it was your point in the Slack. You kind of said, well, the use cases are chatbot call centers and dev co-pilots. That's clearly what Amazon wants everyone to build, right? Amazon Bedrock is the way to build that. And I at first I was like, I thought it was pretty cool, but I did, part of me was like, I see why they did this. A second part of me was like, wow, after finally getting all of this AI stuff that in theory was going to make it simpler, all we're getting is more infrastructure and more services. Like at the end of this, I was like, this is pretty complicated. I thought this was going to get easier. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But clearly Amazon's thing is everyone needs to build a chatbot, and we have every service to do it. So that was like a big takeaway I had from that.
Yeah. No, they very much are like, we are the picks and shovels. For every gold rush, we are the picks and shovels, and we will continue to have better picks and shovels. And I'm still a little bit. I mean, there's a part of me that looks at their AI strategy, and Andy tried to sort of reinforce it as like, look, we've always been, like you said, we've always been the everything store. We think we're going to once again be the everything store. Like, there's a part of me that's like, I get that. If you were talking to the enterprise, for example, the enterprise is always like, I would like a little bit of everything because I'm going to throw a little bit of everything and I'm going to make you figure out all the complexities of it. But at the same time, you're like, to your point, which has always been like, do you want all that stuff, or you just want to kind of go to the one thing that just sort of takes care of it for you? And I think there's still I think the market is still kind of on the fence of like, do we go all in on one thing, or do we want 10,000, options and so forth? And I don't think that's sort of been shaken out. And I think AWS, that, they're still the one that's kind of has the different strategy than everybody else. And it'll be interesting to see if that plays out. They wanted to convey the idea that it will, but it'll be interesting. The next thing I had is, Andy came out and he talked a lot about, he said like, oh, we have 1,000 GenAI apps going on inside of Amazon. And then he started showing some examples. And like Rufus, obviously you look at it and you go, okay, that's a chatbot. I get it. And then he started, throwing out some other examples. Like he had one that was, we do this service with the video for when the football games are on Thursday night. So I think it's on Prime Video, but I forget what it's called. It's basically like, as the game is going on, it's throwing some stuff on the screen that's kind of predicting what might happen with the next play. And it was one of those things where I went, yeah, but by definition, like, how is that Gen AI and not just a predictive analytic thing, right? And I think what he did, which was, both good and a little bit confusing, was he kept going back to examples in which you were like, okay, in my mind, if I think Gen AI is primarily sort of like copilots and chatbots and summarizers and stuff, and then he was like, here's this thing we have with the video, and then here's this thing we have in the warehouses when we're pulling packages for you, and this is how the robots figure out like how much stuff will fit in a box, and then once the box is half full, will the next thing fit in the box? And so like I think he tried to sort of blur the lines between being like, here's cool stuff that AI can do, forget about what the technology is, but I'm going to keep saying Gen AI because people think that's this thing that it can change the future. And I think he actually did a pretty good job of sort of being like, the reality is, if you want to do really interesting stuff with AI, really kind of changing the game stuff, it's probably going to be some combination of kind of predictive AI stuff or some other, other technique that's not Gen AI. And then there's going to be wrappers or pieces of interfaces that are going to be Gen AI. And I think he did a good job of not going into the weeds on that, but showing examples of like, here's the possibility of the future, better than a lot of people have done that have just sort of been beating the Gen AI drum. And I appreciated that. And at the same time, I'm still like, if you're somebody who's like, I want to see what AWS's AI is like, there's still not a chat GPT for me to play around with and figure stuff out, right? Like, I think they still lack that one app that is going to draw everybody to what they do, that isn't sort of classic AWS, go to the everything store sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And I think, your point there is, I mean, I guess you could say he did a good job, but he also is sort of kind of doing a little bit of that Jensen kind of from NVIDIA thing. It's like, hey, let me show you all these other interesting use cases. But kind of what you're talking about is like with Amazon, you were just sort of like, well, some of them felt very force fit, right? You're like, I'm not totally sure that is what you're saying. And it feels like there's a need to kind of claim everything is a Gen A application. The other one they mentioned on the development side is something, and they've told the story around Java upgrades. They sent, they essentially automated or helped streamline their Java updating the JDK or the JRE, right? And so, and they basically have some enormous savings. I mean, it was like, I don't know, like 1 million man years. It's obviously an exaggeration, but it was a huge thing. And so that part I kind of get. I see what they're saying there, but at the same time too, I think there's still the same struggle because I mean, if anything, I think Jassy's trying to pitch everyone on like, you got to do this, right? You got to build yourself a chatbot, and it's like, well, maybe or maybe not. And to that, I'll just kind of tee up my next one was, Jassy probably spent the most time talking about their new Nova foundation models. So this is their answer to like OpenAI or to Anthropic, which is interesting because we're walking that frenemy line. They talked about how great Anthropic was, which of course they have a huge investment, and they even kind of acknowledged many times that it was probably the leading model. While simultaneously, they went out and said they basically built a new foundation model, some of the smaller mini models, and they have essentially, been spending in the last few years, if you will, catching up and building that foundation model. So that was sort of like, I think Jassy's like big moment was like, we have it now. And of course, just like we've been talking throughout this episode, it's like whatever, and we'll just use the number. It's like 40% cheaper, right? Something along those lines. And it's almost as good. And if you look at the various benchmarks, the early benchmarks seem to indicate that like, it's on par with the big foundation models. Who knows? Like who's exactly ahead or behind. But that was the other thing, was sort of like, clearly AWS, or Amazon in general, is like, we got to have a foundation model. They've built a foundation model, and this is the one that they think is going to provide the best cost benefit for you. And that kind of gets into like, some of the stuff we've been thinking about, talking about, is like, have we plateaued a little bit? Can anyone with enough money now build a model? Because clearly Amazon did, right? Or is, OpenAI is going to be doing their 12 days of Christmas here and 12 days of announcements in the next few days. So maybe they'll jump ahead. But that was the big thing, was sort of like, I think clearly they wanted to say, it's like, we have a model that's just as good as everybody else and you should use it. But you're exactly right. I thought they would maybe release some type of like consumer facing version of it. And to the date, I haven't seen it, have not seen anything like that. So to use it, I think you have to go into the AWS console and do something. So it'd be interesting to see if they jump into that market at some point.
Yeah, I have to imagine somewhere along the lines, because we've seen various sort of rumors leak out. Like, I'm sure they were probably like, no, the app is going to be Alexa, right? Like, because they talked about the Alexa team and they talked about, hey, we're rewriting Alexa and all. Like, I'm sure they were like, hey, the thing we're going to take advantage of the fact is there are like hundreds of millions of Alexas. They're going to be way smarter. And it's like, it's not totally ready yet. Like, we don't want to be made a fool of for doing that. I thought the thing that's interesting and I feel like is playing out a little bit is, and we've talked about this on previous shows, like a while ago we were like, okay, Google has this, way ahead model. Like Gemini is really advanced, and obviously OpenAI is really advanced, and they're tied to Microsoft. Facebook has a pretty advanced one with Llama 3 now. And we were like, and it doesn't feel like Amazon has one, but they feel like they were hedging their bets with Anthropic. I got to imagine it's got to be a really weird game of chess that's going on these days, because on one hand, there's probably people inside of Amazon or AWS who are like, hey, we've already given Anthropic like multiple $1 billion. Let's just pull the trigger. Let's just buy those guys. Let's get this thing in house. They're the last free agent. They're really good at what they do. And then at the same time, there's got to be folks who are like, yeah, but what happens when half that company quits and starts, son of Anthropic? And I think I think they're probably all sort of learning from what happened with OpenAI and Microsoft of like, because it's such a small fraternity of people that know how to build these frontier models, it's not growing exponentially, and they're all basically like, they're all. I mean, they got to imagine. I can imagine they go into every single meeting going like, "Give me more money. Give me more. I'm quitting. I'm going. Give me more money." They probably are hedging their bets right now between being like, I have to have something pretty good like a Nova, but I wish I had Anthropic because they have all these smart people, but I can't trust that those people are going to come over and stay because like they're not longtime AWS loyalists. They're not longtime Amazon loyalists. And yes, we probably can pay them pretty well and, we'll compensate them with stock, but like they're not getting the royal treatment like they're probably getting somewhere else. And like, that's got to be such a weird dynamic of like, I really want these people, but I can't trust them on any given day that they're not all just going to be like, screw it, I'm leaving and going to do my next thing. And I'm going to get $25 billion in VC funding because it's just sitting there waiting to show up. So, I mean, I think that's probably why they played that tap dance thing with Anthropic.
But I think, to your point,
they're probably not sure where those guys are.
Yeah, but I think to your point, I think it is a really weird dance that's just in an industry going on right now between OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, AWS, and Microsoft. And I guess we'll throw in Facebook there too, right? And it's like at this point,
and Tesla, right?
Yeah, that's true. Tesla X, whatever, the whole thing that they're building. So it really does come down to at this point, like, and I think Nova's like a real example of like, who knows how far behind AWS was, but like whatever. They're pretty much, in the game now. So if OpenAI and Anthropic can't show like, significant improvements, right, that only they can do, then and maybe one of them will, like maybe OpenAI sort of transitions to the consumer focused version of this, right? And it's almost like a brand more than it is a technology. Maybe there's the opportunity there. But from the technology point of view, I think if you're at those companies, you got to be worried that like it's being replicated very, very fast, right? The fact that like people can build comparable models especially these huge companies with tons of money. So on the OpenAI and Anthropic roadmap, if there isn't something that they can do that's distinctly better, you're going to see the valuation of these companies go down quick. And none of these, you talked about the partnerships, like there's nothing more than Microsoft and AWS would like to do than kind of be done with these two, right? Would just be like, put them out to pasture, do some acquisition and be like, we've subsumed this functionality. So, and I'm sure, Sam Altman and the leader of Anthropic, if they're running those companies, I'm sure they have a roadmap that says we have the next thing coming that you don't even know is possible. And so we'll just have to see what happens.
Right. Well, and they're in that a little bit of, I mean, granted, we were wondering for a long time, like, why are these guys hoarding so much cash? Why are they, now we sort of are realizing because everything is a $20 billion bet and a $50 billion bet. But yeah, there's got to be certain meetings that are happening that were like, okay, fine, let's just go ahead and buy Anthropic. That'll be $25 billion. And then somebody's like, yeah, but we already had that allocated for GPU spend for next quarter or next year. So, I mean, do you want to buy GPUs or do you want to buy the data scientists, but you can't buy both? And that's got to be, it's really interesting times. I saw somebody say like the only moat anymore is just capital, right? Like it's not the thing. And it was interesting the way that Andy, if you go back and look, the way that Andy presented Nova, he kind of did this tap dance thing where he was like, it's really good. We used all the standard benchmarks, but sometimes there weren't benchmarks. So we kind of made up our own benchmark. And it was like, okay, that's fine. He's trying not to get too much into the weeds and talk about these benchmarks. But what was interesting was the numbers that he showed, the way that he showed like the leaderboard was in such small font. It was like, I don't really want you guys to look at where we are in here. I don't want you to nitpick it. Whereas other times, like when they're in the top right corner of the Gartner Magic Quadrant, when they would show stuff like that,
right,
or how many, those things are as big and bold as you possibly get. So this was one of those where he was like, yeah, it's good. I mean, it's not the best, but it's good enough. It's, and I think that was what he was trying to convey is like, don't get too hung up in the details of these things. They're all basically the same. Ours is better, but it's basically the same. All right. Next thing I had on my list, and you're gonna kind of appreciate this because I know you called this out. Garmon came out. First thing he said, first time being the CEO, first time he said anything, he goes, "We are all about security. We are the most secure cloud. And then it wasn't talked about ever again in the keynote. Like what was going on? Like at first, like because I remember you made a comment, and you were like, man, the security team is so psyched. Like they got top billing in this thing. And then it was never mentioned again. Security was not talked about again after like the first minute of the whole thing. Like what happened? Like how did that, I've never seen the first thing that you come out and talk about like gets like 1 minute of airtime and then it's not repeated anywhere else. Like what happened?
Well, I think, it's like, you've done a lot of this, it's the art of the keynotes, right? And it's sort of like, everybody is pitching to get their stuff in. And I think, there is always this acknowledgement. And I think the way Garmin started, sort of like the back to basics was the beginning. And I think what the security team, my guess is like their pitch was like, hey, people are really concerned about all of the things that can go bad and like losing data and things like that. And all the security events we've had this last year. So I think the pitch from them was like, we have to put everybody at ease. And, and I think the Garmin, is sort of like, instead of coming out and being like, hit you with like the AI stuff, it's like, let me come out and put everyone at ease. And let me first hit on some of the old security stuff, right? And just let you know, like, we're secure. Don't worry. We've thought about all the things that are going to go wrong. And if you use us, Mr. CIO, and you're going to be in a safe place, right? It's sort of like just putting everyone at ease before they start going into the stuff. So that was my take. Now, I will say kind of a different thing is like, they did spend a lot of time on guardrails inside of the Amazon Bedrock stuff, which is a kind of a backhanded / related security event. So I think that was sort of like, really all they were trying to say there is like, don't worry, if you put out a chatbot with you, we'll make sure it doesn't say inappropriate things and get everyone fired, right? That's what they were kind of trying to say with guard. And that's why they spent, I think, a lot of time on guardrails. So I think, in these keynotes, I think you're just sort of like calming the audience. You're like, don't worry. I know you're a little worried about some new stuff. Let me just here. Let me tell you a little bit about security. Let me tell you a little bit about guardrails, and then we'll get back to the fun stuff. That was kind of my take on it. Yeah, you're right. They did in the AI side. They did try, like you said, they tried to address the concerns that people have that aren't just excited about what's new. They're like, okay, cool. So you're not going to be on the leading edge. You're going to be just behind that guy. And the top conversations we have with you are,
how do I make sure my data doesn't, how do I get my data into the system? And they were like, oh, we have this RAG thing and you can kind of include it. And it's like, okay, cool. So I can do that. And then it was like, how do I make sure it doesn't say stuff that's going to get me sued? And it was like, okay, here's the guardrails. We're not going to talk about politics, or we're not going to talk about whatever, there's that thing. And then it was like, oh yeah, one last thing. How do I make sure it just doesn't like lie to people or tell? And that was where he went through this long-winded thing about hallucinations, about how like they have some cryptographic validation thing that happens over in S3, and they just went around, going through the cubicles now that everybody's back to working in the office. And they were like, hey, anybody got any ideas on how to fix? Do we have anything that does invalidates whatever? And he went through this whole long thing in the classic AWS way. And you were like, yeah, but isn't by nature, isn't just hallucinations just a feature of LLMs? Like they're not predictable. And so, like there's a part of it of like, how is this cryptographic thing over from S3, which is just validating if the math is right? Like, I think the math is right that comes out of these LLMs. It just, the word ordering, which is a guess, might be wrong. So it's like, how did that kind of work? But I appreciate him, kind of trying to address it, but they addressed it in this sort of weird way where you're like, yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's really going to work, but at least people are going to be like, well, Amazon's giving it a try. And I really haven't heard anybody else say they're giving it a try. So we'll stick with, they got 2 out of 3. They got 2.5 out of 3 stars. So we'll stick with that. Yeah, that was interesting to watch him tap dance through some of those things. Cause I don't know how I don't think the industry has a way to get around hallucinations at this point. Although Google tries to solve it by saying like, we'll just go back and look at search because we know search is always right. That was what I had for my big list. That was what I had for I had some other stuff too that was, I think we covered a lot. Anything else you had on your list as far as good stuff for the keynote?
Well, I think we've hit on the major announcements
and validate and take a look at.
Yeah, I think we've hit on the major announcements. I think though, maybe a couple, final takeaways here was sort of like because again, the kind of the meta commentary of the keynote is like one thing that I both, you can like or dislike about Amazon, but at the end of the day, at the heart of it is really a bunch of like product people / engineers that love to talk about like what they've built. And I think, that's why this keynote is 3 hours instead of an hour and a half, because like there's some things we didn't get to, right? They went through and talked about this new Amazon Aurora DSQL, distributed SQL. And I have never seen someone talk so much about synchronizing clocks and like how they do it, which is both simultaneously impressive while being unbelievably boring. Like I just told me like, we figured out a way to sync the clocks and this is going to make distributed databases better. And that's all I needed to hear. Like, I'll take your word for it. Like, but I mean, they just went on and on and on about that. And I think to me, that's just like always interesting about like why the keynote is 3 hours. And, you've kind of hit on some of the other stuff. Like Jassy went through this incredibly detailed explanation about like, oh, we've solved hallucination. At the end, you're like, I don't think this works. Right. Or they went through an incredibly long, detailed thing about tables inside of S3. Right. And the Parquet format, right? Which I don't know. Maybe everyone here knows. And it was just like, they're just getting to such, because, when you get into, as right, better than maybe everyone, it's like, people are always like, get to the benefits. Why does it matter, right? Don't talk so much about the how. You're going to bore people. But like at the end, right, that is the nucleus of this company, combined with, they 100% believe, and Jassy said it too, was sort of like, the world needs everything and they're going to provide everything. And it's like, it's on the week of sort of watching Intel kind of, if you will, metaphorically collapse, right? I always think to myself, this is the tower upon which AWS and Amazon is built. The day that someone comes out and be like, you don't need everything, we have the one thing that makes it simple. That is really how you attack AWS and Amazon going forward. And, they totally believe that you need everything and you will only need more and more going forward. And that is so embedded in the culture, if you will. It's the bedrock of the culture. And that was kind of my biggest takeaway. And it's like, so far, they've been right, but at the same time, as my co-host on Software Defined Talk likes to talk about, Michael Cote, he's always like, didn't we already build all this stuff? Didn't we already have all of this stuff? Like, why is it just getting more complicated? That's sort of like his entire 20-year career of IT. It's like, why are we just making it more complicated? Does it ever get easier? And so that to me is like, the biggest question going forward for all of these companies is like, can we ever make it simpler? Can we ever make all of this simpler? And if that day ever comes, Amazon and AWS will be in trouble. But until then, I see nothing but continued growth. And I see nothing more than more and more services and more keynotes coming in the future. And of course, we'll cover them all here on the Cloudcast or Software Defined Talk.
Yeah. You reminded me of the DSQL thing. I mean, the DSQL thing was, that thing was fascinating to me because Google came out with Cloud Spanner, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago or something. Like, it was a long time ago. And it was basically the guy who invented CAP theorem for databases. I think, I forget his name, but you can go look him up. We'll put a link to it. They came out and they were like, look, this was one of those Google moments of like, we're the smartest people in the world. We have the best network in the world. It's not even close. And we have the guy who invented the technology, and he has moved it forward. It would be like if you were like, we have Einstein, and Einstein has theory of relativity 2.0, and they came out and he did the thing. And then Amazon comes out and does this DSQL thing again, like 5 years late. And you're watching it and you're like, God, there are some people at Google right now that are just furious because they basically were like, we have a better network than Google. And then Andy had the nerve to be like, yeah, I guess you could compare it to something, I don't know, like Spanner. There's other things out there. And we're just better. And you wonder if like this was just, it went that long because somebody was in a bar somewhere and they got pissed off at someone and they were like, oh no, I'm going to take something that would have been one of the press release announcements, a bullet point somewhere, and I'm going to drag this thing out for like 10 minutes and just try and like, and you're like, is that the thing that you want to run on Google? Because Google, like, there's lots of things you could beat up on Google about. I'm not sure being a better network than Google is something you really want to deal with. But that was interesting to watch because I'm like, there's something behind the scenes there that this thing dragged out so long. Because I know it's hard math and all that kind of stuff, but like, I was like, I don't think this is the thing you want to do. But yeah, I would have loved to have been the Google team for Spanner being like, you're going there? I can't believe you're going there. What in the world are you doing?
You did it? You really did that? No.
All right. Well, good stuff. Yeah. Did you? You guys realize we did that 6 years ago, right? Like, so yeah, I've never seen Amazon be that late to something and then make it out like we've come up with something like really new and cool. So anyways, well, good, man. Thank you for helping us recap. This is always a fun thing to do this time of year. I think the last couple shows we're doing are going to be, classic sort of filling in for the year, give people stuff to listen to while they're driving to parents. We're going to do some mailbags. We're going to do some year-end stuff. Any last thoughts about AWS of things that you'll be looking forward to next year, or just thoughts for the year-end wrap-up? Are you shutting it down for the year, or you have to work through the end of it?
Yeah, and I'll be working. We'll have some, we'll have some more fun episodes on Software Defined Talk. So we'll do a mailbag and end of year and predictions. Everyone likes to do that. That's like the fun time for podcasters. Yeah. And as far as AWS and Amazon, I think it's sort of like, and maybe this is just a statement for cloud. It's like, hey, we talk a lot about hyperscalers and like what's going to happen. And it's like, really right now, I think current course of speed, like all these companies are going to continue to grow at similar rates. They're all making tons of money. It's sort of like, as we go head into next year, I expect them all to continually do well, and it'll be fun because like when I say stuff like that, like something catastrophic will happen. So that's what I think is kind of fun when you think about all of this stuff is like, it's always the calm before the storm, but things seem pretty calm. It seems like all the hyperscalers are doing well, and I expect AWS to continue to do very, very well.
Yeah, no, I think they'll do well. I do feel like since COVID has ended, they are more competitive with each other though. Like the level of them making money and like the differences between them is better. And competition is always fun. It got boring when it was just sort of one kicking everybody else's butt. So, all right, well, I will wrap it up. We may touch on a little bit more college football as the playoffs come in the next week or two. So don't be worried. And we mentioned that for a few minutes, but Brandon, thank you for all the hard work helping us over here at Cloudcast. Hopefully we'll have you back in January to do Cloud News of the Month, if there is any for December other than this stuff. And with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.